your smile. Now the sunshine brings the light. Fill me out with a flame. I will let you in this game. Take me out when I'm down. 'Cause with you I'm safe and sound. 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 Safe and sound.
I give in to the lesser fight. My body aches to be satisfied. My weakness comes and goes. My weakness comes and goes. I'm reaching out for the easy high. Please fortify this strength of mine. My weakness comes and goes. My weakness comes and goes. My body aches to be satisfied. My weakness comes and goes. My weakness comes and goes. I'm reaching out for the easy high. Please fortify this strength of mine. My weakness comes and goes. My weakness comes and goes, it goes, it goes. My weakness echoes in my soul. Oh, it echoes in my soul. My weakness comes and goes, it goes, it goes.
Well, very good evening. Nice to have you all together. Well, we've got a great show on tonight, and a very, very warm welcome to all those listeners and viewers from around Thailand and the neighboring countries, but also from around the world. It is wonderful to have you with us, and we certainly look forward to a great hour session. We have a fantastic team of experts this evening for some of us, like us in parts of the world. Others, it's morning, I know, in South America and the Americas, and sort of midday in Europe. But a very warm welcome to all of you. So I just to give you a little bit of background to how we will run this event for the forthcoming hour, is to field questions from all those that are out there. You can either come online so we can see you and put your question to one of the panel, and I'll introduce the panel in a moment, or you can write your question in the Q&A, and I'll pick it up from there and then put that question to our experts. Now, you know, I could have chosen anyone, but I chose the three experts on the screen because they are exactly that. And the nice thing about this, everyone, all you viewers out there, you practically can ask these guys anything you want. However, it has to be in the field of the study this evening, and that is on flexibles. So, you thought you were going to get away with asking them any question. Not tonight, not tonight. Okay, so let's start off with the panel to introduce you each one of them to you. And in that way, you can gather some information about each of them and see how best you will put the question to them, which one fits that particular person the best. However, having said that, I do ask the panel to, at any stage, if you feel that you have something to offer while someone else is answering the question, please put up your finger and I'll certainly bring the question for you to answer as well, or add your value to it. And I know that all of you have a lot of value to add. All three of you I've known for many years, hence why I chose you. And I know that you can add a lot of value in the flexible industry in this forum. I know you add a lot of value to the flexible industry out there in the big wide world, but to this forum that is really from folk from all around the world. But I have to say is predominantly from Southeast Asia. So when you're answering the questions, try and keep them in that sort of spectrum of the question coming from the region that they're asking it. Bearing in mind that many of the folk are asking questions are not as widely traveled. I was going to say wildly, but I won't. Widely traveled gentlemen as the three of you are. So, Mr. Joe Foster, let's start with you in relation to just give me a little bit of background of where Joe fits in. Joe's been in the industry for probably 35 years plus, give or take a few years. I know Joe, but I didn't want to make it sound too many because you know what that means. So, but Joe has got an incredible understanding of flexibles and has been not only in Australia, but he's also had businesses in South Africa, in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, in Kenya, and then obviously more recently based in Australia. Joe, you know, some of the viewers might recall that you won a WPO, a World Packaging Organization Lifetime Achievement Award earlier this year. And that's no mean feat. I can assure you that there are not many of you folk out there that have that award. So well done. And now that we have the opportunity of telling you. But Joe, one of the things that you enjoy most, I know, is training and educating others. And that's a lot of value is, you know, comes with that. A lot of self-satisfaction comes with that as well. But it does mean that you could be fired with a lot of questions and there could be very unusual, let's put it that way. You know what it's like having students. They fire questions at you that you never thought anyone would ask you. Joe, if I had to say to you, what has been, in terms of the flexible industry, what has been the standout moment for you over the last 35 years?
You mean in terms of changes within the flexible industry or my own personal standout moments within the industry itself? You're thinking sort of like, if I look at really answering it in terms of changes in the industry over the last sort of 35 years, I think some big advancements that we've seen really, certainly over the last 10 years, has been the very rapid move into the digital space. Digital flexible packaging per se has taken off quite fast over the last 10 years. And then also, I think with the event of smart packaging as well, and we're going to see a lot of new innovations being driven around smart packaging. And of course, recently, over the last 3 or 4 years, of course, we're talking about the whole focus around sustainability and the challenges that we're all faced with sustainability moving into the next generation. And certainly for the younger generation, to educate those to understand the challenges that we have with the current type of flexible packaging materials that are available in the marketplace, and what we need to do and how we're going to change those thoughts on people's minds when they're choosing the right type of packaging substrate.
You know, Joe, as you were talking there, if I was sitting in the listener in your classroom, there are many questions just from that little piece there that I'd like to ask you, but we'll come to that in a moment. Let me introduce one of our next panelists, Alan Adams. Now, I think the thing that stands out most about you, Alan, in the years that we've known each other, is your passion, your passion for packaging. And I'll go one step further. It's your passion for packaging that makes two things: makes life better for everyone, but also better in terms of sustainability. That is something that I've got quite a few questions on that I'm going to ask you later on in terms of sustainability, because that's a big thing nowadays. It's, everyone talks about it. and certainly I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about sustainability. So I'm going to ask you later on to sort of clear that myth maybe around sustainability. At one stage, it was a word that was thrown around quite a lot. But one of the things maybe is a clear definition for our listeners. In fact, on that particular subject, before we continue, Alan, if sustainability is such a big thing for us, but particularly for you and your company, Sea on Air, and you're representing a fairly large region of the Asia Pacific in that particular space, what do you think, in your mind, from a sustainability aspect, do you think that the folk in your region, Asia Pacific, what part do you think they're not getting or understanding?
Wow, there's so much in that. You know, I think that it's such a great question, because I think that one of the things we're going through, and Joe referenced it in his answer, is that perhaps one of the standout biggest changes in the packaging industry right now is really embracing sustainability and considering genuinely how we can make so much more of the solutions circular. So I think that is really, really important. But I think what are we not getting? I would say it's a sense of maturity around the real impact of sustainability and making good decisions in sustainability. There is a fair bit of sort of strong reaction driven by emotional attention to the industry. And I think that at times that can drive outcomes, questions, feelings, and is influencing consumers' perception of packaging down a path that it perhaps actually isn't ideally represented in. And, you know, very topical for today. We're here talking about flexible packaging. And when it comes to flexible packaging, it's probably at the far end of the difficult sphere, if you like, for generating circular outcomes. So a maturity and understanding and balancing correctly the outcomes versus the performance and the real total environmental impact. And instead of picking on one emotional aspect and driving decisions around one emotional aspect. And now I'm representative of a large plastics manufacturer. So, you know, I put that out there as a preface to any one of my answers. But I would say that the advantage that these materials can deliver to the world has not been fully tapped, fully extracted, and we need to balance that with innovation around how we create better environmental outcomes and reduce leakage of these materials into the environment as they are used or after they're used.
Yeah, there's quite a few aspects we're going to pull at that in a moment, because you know, there's that. I want to bring in your bioplastics experience as well. Now, I know you were very involved in that in sort of, you know, a few years back, but I'm sure you haven't forgotten all that stuff, and it really plays a big part in your field of study at the moment in relation to, you know, what you represent, and certainly in the flexible world. But let's come back to that in a moment. Before but I'd like to, before we carry on, is introduce our third guest expert, Anthony Payton. Now, Anthony also has in excess of 30 years. You know, that the three of you have in excess, I guess, of maybe just touching on 100 years of experience between the three of you. You know, you guys should know everything that anyone wants to know about flexibles. In fact, now that I think about it, imagine 100 years of experience. That's quite something. But Anthony, I think everyone knows you for two things. I know you because, like the other two gentlemen, you're passionate. You're passionate about packaging, and that shines through all the time, as it does with Joe and Alan. You know, you are fully involved, focused, and you eat, live, sleep, drink packaging. And I think that's brought through so well in this prep tool, which maybe later on I might ask you to sort of give a very brief explanation of that, because there might be some listeners that don't know what prep means. You know, it's not, well, maybe it is. It's preparation of something, you know, but maybe that's what they think prep stands for. So I'd like, you know, for you to explain that to the listeners. But, you know, like the other two, you're also extensively out there. You're not only in Australia and New Zealand. I mean, you're out there in the United Kingdom, you're out there in Singapore, the United, and I guess that, you know, you'll be accessing or going into a number of Asian markets in the months and the years to come. So my question to you in relation to this passion that you have for the circular economy and all these things that are good, which touches back into sustainability that I mentioned to Alan a moment ago. Do you think we're going to get it? Are we going to achieve what we need to achieve? You know, that graph of that by 2050, if we don't do what we should be doing, we need like nearly 3 planet Earths, and we don't have it. I'm sure you've seen that. Yeah. Are we going to change that trajectory?
Thanks, Pierre, for that lovely introduction. I'm a pretty optimistic person straight away, and there's so many aspects, as Alan was talking about sustainability, and people talk about climate change, people talk about resource destruction and all different things, and you know, marine pollution and so on. But they all got to try and come together, because you can't just solve one of them. Now, the circular economy is about getting materials around the cycle. That's what it's all about. Don't use them once, keep them going around. But if you solve that problem, you start to solve other problems as well. So I think it's trying to look at some of these things to say, well, if we take a big step forward to solve a particular problem, who are the beneficiaries of that? Because the beneficiaries may be the brand owners have a greater reputation. It may be that the marine life has less impacts. It may be that the local economies of microeconomies that are recovering materials and creating new jobs and from using resources, they're the beneficiaries. So that example just shows 3 beneficiaries, but too often we look at some of these projects based on a singular winner and say, okay, who's going to win in this supply chain? So it might be between the supplier and the customer. It's just sort of it's a one-way, you know, there's 2 parties in the whole process. But I think it's more bringing in externalities to the whole decision-making as well, because when you look at the externalities and when you make a big positive change, then you can start to see where the benefits come from. And the more benefits you can convey to the broader masses, the more likely the masses are come towards the solution. Because it's also saying you might start with a problem in the middle, but if the beneficiaries are outwards, the people on the outwards will come inwards and be part of the solution as well. So it's trying to build an army.
So, Joe, you wanted to say something? I saw your voice.
Sorry. No, it's okay. Sorry.
Anthony, I mean, that sounds good. And I like the positiveness. And I guess all 3 of you are, well, that which I know, are very positively minded people. But I recall once, and I'm not going to mention the country because that'd be unfair. But in my role in the WPO, I was meeting with various government officials, and we were talking about sustainability and recycling and all those good things that should be happening with packaging. And looking at the environment and the terrible state of that particular country, of its environment, and talking to this gentleman, he basically said to me that our focus is more ensuring that we feed our people. That's our focus, and not the waterways of our rivers. Mm. How should I answer that?
Well, there's a project that I think it's a Project Stop, looking at sort of a local micro program where you're cleaning up the beaches, but because you're cleaning up the beaches, you're capturing materials. So the collection, you put some value on what you're collecting. So plastic, for instance, flexible plastics, even rigid. If you can actually have an aggregation of that material to such a point where you can get some guaranteed offtake of those materials, which brings revenue into your community, then you're achieving 2 things at once, because it's the cleaning up of the beaches actually leads to the feeding of the people. So that's the thing about trying to look at on both ends of the solution? Where's the material going to come from, and can you solve one problem, but also achieve a second problem in the same solution?
Okay. So then, Alan, you were talking a moment ago about, you emphasized the fact about sustainability. And at the same time, I remind our listeners that through packaging, tell me if I'm wrong or right, Alan, through packaging, I can have practically any vegetable, any fruit, anywhere, anytime in the world, because packaging allows me to do that. Would you say yes or no to that answer, to that question?
Look, I think when it comes to products that are particularly susceptible, so fresh produce across the board from meats into vegetables, that answer does need to be tempered slightly. We need robust supply chains and cold chains that are operating reasonably efficiently. Packaging can certainly help most situations and extend most outcomes, but it isn't a panacea. So it will be helpful, but there isn't a packaging system that's going to solve everything when we have infrastructure gaps. So, I think that in part to your question to Anthony, which is a challenging one just before, regarding should we be feeding people or how to, what's our priorities? Infrastructure is such a challenging space. We need to be able to collect materials, and we need to be able to process materials. We need infrastructure and supply chains and cold chains. And but I do agree with Anthony. Actually, the opportunity is that there is value to be had, and there are organisations across the board from front end and protecting produce through to operating supply chains, through to people looking to take advantage of waste, what was previously waste materials as resources. And there is quite a lot of activity in this space in a number of countries in Southeast Asia, particularly.
But taking it one step further, that packaging does protect product. We know that, and I mean that's why we pack. But some of that packaging is not sustainable. So how do we bring this to let's say the man in the street? You three guys are educated in your field of study. You're knowledgeable, but the man in the street's not knowledgeable about packaging. They know about packaging. They can say, they can give a rough definition of it. But how do we explain to them that on the one hand, you're asking to have an extended shelf life, and on the other hand, we want a product or packaging material that's recyclable? How do we find the common ground, Alan?
Well, actually, I really love the way you phrased that question, because you said packaging that delivers these great outcomes but is not sustainable. In my definition of sustainable packaging, delivering a good outcome for protecting the product and enabling a good experience with the product. If we took food, for example, enabling it to travel safely through the supply chain securely and feed someone who wants it and needs it, is probably a sustainable outcome in its own right. And I think that this perspective in some ways harks back to my first kind of couple of points and the overarching thinking and maturity of discussion around sustainability. It is as Anthony said, it's a number of things coming together at the same time. We can't probably ultimately forever just have brilliant supply chains with high performance packaging. We can't probably have just recyclable packaging. We need both the right product outcomes and the right recovery programs coming together in the right space. And I think what we see at the moment in time, and perhaps behind my excitement about being part of the packaging industry, the flexible plastics packaging industry right now, is there is so much innovation going on in the technology and the materials that both deliver good outcomes, but make them more recoverable. And at the same time, in recovery and circular technologies and infrastructure that can deal with materials that were previously thought to be particularly difficult or hard to recover. And, sealed air is a part of a demonstration in Europe very recently, which shows how we can take previously unrecycled, mixed, dirty or contaminated flexible materials and turn it into a product that we can put back into food contact. We don't have to go back very far, and that was unthinkable.
Yeah, I like the way you answered that question, because you brought a number of elements into it that I guess not too many of us often think about. And it's balancing it, finding that optimum point of not over packaging, but at the same time packaging sufficiently not to allow deterioration of the food. Because we don't want to, we've got, the UN tells me that we're wasting 35% of food. That's a shocker. Mm. So, Joe, you thought I was never going to get to you. But in this flexible world, because I've been a similar period of time as you have in the industry, and the fastest sort of growing area, I look back on my career, has been in flexibles, same as yours. I've been dying to ask you this question for a long time. Now I have the opportunity on an open forum like this where you have to answer the question. And the question is, I want to keep away from glass, metals, paper, and rigid plastics. But if you have to bring it in, you can in your answering. But I want you to focus on flexibles. I've seen the most change and development of all the different types of packaging systems, materials, has been in flexibles. Is that going to be the case for the next 35 years?
It's a very good question, Pierre, and thank you very much. I do see, I want to go back to one of the earlier questions that you asked and then add on to the answer. And that was, how does a man on the street sort of understand about the packaging, and Alan's answered it very well in terms of it's providing a service, it's providing a process to keep the food fresh, keep the food safe, and food safety is obviously quite important. There's no doubt about it. But how do you explain that to the person on the street? How do you explain to the person on the street that it's not just a piece of plastic? That piece of plastic that they're looking at, whatever that type of material is, has been cleverly designed and cleverly engineered to ensure that, let's call it the packaging hierarchy, has been achieved right through the whole life cycle of the product. And when we talk about the packaging hierarchy, we talk about very important factors that we have to take into consideration: product protection, product security. We talk about packaging that's going to withstand good transportation around the world. We talk about packaging that's going to provide a shelf life. Because as we know, if you go back 35 years ago, the shelf life of packaging was, or the shelf life of product, should I say, was probably 2 months, 3 months, 4 months at a max. Now we're expecting packaging to add the performance of the product to give you shelf life in some cases of 2 years, 3 years, or even sometimes 4 years, depending on actually what that product is. So you're right, Pierre, in saying that the flexible packaging industry has changed dramatically and is still changing. And what I find is quite amazing, and Alan has certainly alluded to it in terms of what's going on with regards to the plastics within flexible packaging, is that we're seeing that we're going back to some basics in terms of some of those basic type of plastic materials that have been around for 60 or 70 years. And we are actually looking to re-engineer those plastics. We're trying to make the plastics in the flexible packaging industry a lot more simpler, but to do things that was never expected out of those flexible packaging materials 20, 30, 40 years ago, by re-engineering them, restructurizing those plastics to give you the same sort of performance as what you will get out of a very complex lamination, as an example. And as we know, like a lamination is a combination of 2 layers of plastic or 3 layers, or depending, it could be paper and so forth. But we're trying to get sort of the more simpler type of plastics. And when we talk about simpler type of plastics, we're talking about polyethylene-based plastics or even polypropylene-based plastics to do the job of a complex laminate, or when I say a complex laminate, a laminate of 2 layers or maybe 3 layers and so forth. So a lot of work is taking place in developing these structures to ensure the packaging hierarchy has been maintained, and the packaging hierarchy will provide the function for that product going into the future. You know, we talk about sort of taking packaging. Can you imagine taking soft plastics, and as I said before, sadly, air materials like Allen's materials and air materials as deemed as soft plastics, even though it's a complex lamination. Can you even consider taking that same plastic, as Alan said, from the landfill, and then being able to regenerate that plastic into what is now a food safe product? I mean, that whole dynamic has changed, certainly in the last 10 or 12 years. You would never have thought about it 10 years ago because it wasn't physically possible, because food safety is one of the key important factors for all of our food moving forward. You speak to any food manufacturing company around the world, doesn't matter where you're based, and you say to them, we want to look at introducing recycled plastics into the mainstream. First question they're going to ask you, is this packaging food safe? What sort of guarantees have I got? There's going to be no leaching. What sort of guarantees that I've got that this product will give me the shelf life that I'm actually looking for? So a lot of work is taking place in the background to re-engineer these plastics, as I said, and then also come up with new formulations to actually take those plastics back from the basics to actually make them more sustainable for the future. And that for me is very, very exciting, because it's actually, it's making us put our thinking caps on and how we can do this. First of all, how we can make it work, i.e. to make it a more sustainable option. And then after that is to make sure it goes back into the circular economy, which to me is also quite exciting.
Interrupt you there. You said make it more sustainable. It's easy to say. How?
Making it more sustainable by ticking all those boxes from the packaging hierarchy perspective. So you talk about shelf life. Let's just a very simple thing like shelf life. So certain foods, meats we talk about as an example, could it be modified atmospheric packaging of meats? I have to say this, a lamination structure which is going to provide a high oxygen barrier and a high moisture barrier. Generally, you don't get that from your very simple plastics like polyethylene-based materials or polypropylene-based materials. But what's happening is by re-engineering those type of materials, okay, and by being able to add in new technologies by putting in very thin layer coatings or thin layer co-extrusions of films, which is actually does work in the recycling chain, doesn't have an issue with regards to contamination of those plastics through the recycling chain, can give you the very same or similar benefits that you would get out of a complex lamination.
So, Joe, you said there about re-engineering and adding thin layers or other materials.
Yes.
I want to take that point and I want to give part of it to Alan and I want to give part of it to Anthony. Yes. And ask Alan first, is that going to satisfy the meat that he's packaging? That's his question. And then the other part of taking it from that point you made into Anthony is saying, well, Anthony, when you answer this question, Anthony, you need to just give them a very brief summary of what PrEP is. How does that fit into the PrEP side of things and meeting, you know, the recycling guidelines that are floating around the world? Various countries have their own, but talk in general in relation to guidelines of recycling. So, Alan, let's start with you. I know I'm taking it away from you, Joe, but I want to bring this aspect in because Alan is in that sort of meat space amongst many others, I know, but I know he's in meat as well.
Yeah, I would say we're really working in terms of innovation down 3 paths, 3 primary functionality paths in that space. One is re-engineering materials using technologies that I think Joe is certainly talking about and alluding to for generating toughness in packaging that otherwise wasn't achieved with polyolefins, with a simple polyethylene type of material. 2, how do we get that high oxygen barrier in by either using a new material type or compatible materials that enable them to still be recyclable at the end of their life? So I think those are 2 really, those are the kind of 3 areas. So toughness, the generation of barrier with new innovations, and then compatibilizing of materials. The other thing I just wanted to throw in here, and I won't take up time for other speakers, but Well, I think what part of the maturity I see coming is that we need to stop thinking about recovery or recycling as a man in the street fixed concept of one outcome. There's a hierarchy of recycling outcomes, which I'm inclined to believe in more and more, and that products are not necessarily static on that. It may be, that we're doing some pretty simple recovery and not fully circular at the base level. But as technology, infrastructure, collection, sorting, and recycling infrastructure develops, we can move them up that hierarchy to perhaps an advanced or chemical type recycling process, which will give us an outcome. And then again, as that source separation and as that sorting technology advances, we can perhaps get to high order mechanical recycling where we're really getting close to full circular and really retaining the value at a high level. Products are not static in that. It's got a lot to do with the infrastructure we have to hand.
Thank you. Anthony, now the half of that question.
Yes, no, thank you for that. I think that also, following on from what Ellen was talking about, there's a lot of work going on. I think we shouldn't undersell how significant it is and how intelligent these people are, because when these people say we're trying to simplify it, it's the furthest thing from simple to achieve these outcomes. Okay, so that's the first thing. And so this is globally happening. We've got a couple of experts here talking about their experiences, but this is also happening in the US. It's happening in Europe to try and improve, I suppose, the outcome at the end of life. And that's right, Alan, that there won't always be a straight mechanical recycling outcome. There'll be some transition periods we'll be going through. But everyone is still pushing in the same direction, it appears. And I think what's going to happen is, even though these good products have been on the marketplace for a while, not all the brands are necessarily purchasing. So it's the packaging companies who are coming up with these innovations, but it's the brand owners have to demand them. And so sometimes there might be a price differential, and they're trying to work out, how do you get these brand owners to step up to actually having a cleaner material going through the process? Another point I want to make is that when it comes to designing packaging, we've got this prep tool, as Pierre mentioned, which is a software tool where you put your parameters of your packaging in, and it gives you assessment of recyclability for both flexibles and rigids. Now, with the flexible side of things, you've got a group, CFlex in Europe, the Circular Economy for Flexible Plastics, and they've recently released a set of guidelines talking about, as their phase 1 standard for materials that are suitable for the circular economy, it's really focusing on monopolymer materials. And so that might be an aspirational thing, but at least once again, we're pushing in the right direction. Because even when you end up with an outcome that uses mechanical recycling or chemical recycling, both of those processes really require the same input. Chemical recycling doesn't like PVC, for instance, or PVDC. So if you can actually have a cleaner stream in your packaging design, your formats, it's not just making it more suitable for the end of life in the mechanical processing and recovery and so on traditionally, but it also makes those same packaging more suitable if it ends up going through a chemical recovery process.
Okay.
Can I just add in there that, one of the things that Anthony just said there, I really love, and that is that for everyone out there, don't settle for status quo. Keep pushing us, keep pushing our industry to innovate and drive forward. We can do better. We can generate better outcomes. We don't have to live with the status quo.
Well, on that question, Alan, it jogs my mind, and I'm going to ask Joe this question. Fast forward, Joe, 10 years. You may have 1 or 2 more grey hairs. But 10 years from now, based on the experience that you will have at that point, and based on what Anthony and Alan have just said in the last few minutes, what would be a really good, suitable, high-class, efficient, effective, flexible material for things like meat, where you want extended shelf life, but it meets all these other things that we want.
Yeah,
we want too much, maybe.
Well, I think we're having to sort of go back to go forward, and that's what I honestly think. We have to go back to the basics. And I know Anthony said it's not basic. It is quite complex. There's no doubt about it. We're trying to take something that was developed as a basic packaging format many, many years ago and trying to make that work in a complex packaging format of today, or a complex society that we live in, because of the high demands that are expected from flexible packaging materials, or for packaging materials per se. I honestly think 10 years from now, okay, I don't honestly believe that sustainability is the main driving factor of packaging or flexible packaging innovation. I might get shot down for this answer, but I think sustainability is part of a requirement in terms of innovation around flexible packaging for the future. So when we're designing new flexible packaging for the future, new concepts for the future, part of that requirement, part of that brief would be to look at that from a sustainability element. So it must actually tick that box, because what we're finding now is that certainly from the last 3 to 4 years since the whole sort of clampdown, the whole change, the whole mindset change from early 2018, is that the big rush and the big drive is out there to come up with this quick, sustainable solution. Now, Alan has alluded, yes, the answers are there. And I don't think it should be a race to the top for any packaging company, for Alan's company, for my company, for Anthony's company. I think as an industry, we should be all working together, because we have to solve this problem and share this information, because a lot of these polymers are available. A lot of these materials are available in the market. And I think we're going to see structures going back to basic structures in name only, but not in performance in terms of how those materials are going to work. There's no doubt about it. Alan talks about a material like a polyethylene based material, we're making it tougher. Who would have thought you would pack meat in polyethylene, right? You wouldn't, because it was too soft, it doesn't have the right oxygen barrier and so forth. But because we've been able to re-engineer these materials, we're actually being able to get similar performances out of a complex material for a meat specification. What I honestly see 10 years from now, the developments around the future of flexible packaging, I really see it is pushing into the digital age, putting into the smart age, active packaging. But within whatever we do in terms of innovation for the future, a requirement, as I said, will be very much around sustainability. It's got to tick those boxes. There's no doubt about it.
You mentioned there about in your answer, it sparked something in my mind, and I'm not quite sure who to direct this to. So tell me which of you, who of you wants to take it on board. Where is nanotechnology going to come into the? I know there's a lot of nanotechnology happening out there in the big wide world, but I'm referring now to nanotechnology in the packaging world, where we as consumers will see the benefit of nanotechnology. Where and how is that going to happen? Will it happen, and how and where? Probably Alan will start.
Beyond me.
All right. Interestingly, some of you may know this is my second forum this evening. The same question came up earlier. Look, our company is primarily involved in two broad market areas, and nanotechnology is not making that big a splash in either of them. There are challenges around migration for food contact products, and so we haven't seen a large splash in that space. I would also hold my hand up and say, hey, I am not an expert in this particular space, and we probably do know a fair bit about it with some of our technical team. But for my broad perspective on it, and I think following on from Joe's answer a little bit before around where are we headed to in 10 years' time, nanotechnology might be part of things, because I liked the way Joe phrased that where we will be in 10 years is a little bit going back to go forward. I totally agree that the future is still defined by the same things we've always been defined by. It's efficiency and reduce the amount of total resources we're consuming. It's the impact on the environment, and it's the form and function and delivery of the service. Those things have never really changed. And in many ways, they are the legs of sustainability as well.
Okay. Joe, you want to add anything on the nanotechnology side?
No, I think Alan has answered that adequately. I think in terms of flexible packaging and with nanotechnology, my only real exposure has been really around the pigments and inks and adhesives and so forth, which is something that I think is a little bit further down the line, and I think it really does capture a position within the digital space. but I think that's certainly a good few years away from where we're looking at it from a flexible packaging point of view.
Yeah. Okay. So, Alan, you touched on, I think it was you that touched on smart packaging, active and intelligent packaging. Are we going to see, I mean, we're seeing a lot of active packaging, you know, when they actively, you know, changing structures and all these sort of things. From the intelligence side, with the different techniques of indicating some information to the consumer, are we going to see this? Bearing in mind that a lot of the listeners are coming in from developing countries, are we going to see this happening in the developing countries? Are they going to get the benefit of intelligent packaging?
Yeah, and I think perhaps if you were to pick a single hottest topic right now, coding and marking, intelligent identification systems into packaging is right up there. You know, nearly, if you scan the news now, that's what you're going to read about. There are several aspects to what is intelligent packaging. There's the functionality, delivery, the ability of the packaging to tell us something about what's going on inside it, or the ability of the packaging to change in some way, shape or form. The area that I see value for everyone, because I know it's a little bit closer to home, is probably around the ability to communicate information. And we will see that going through security and safety. We will see it through the conveying information up and down the supply chain to verify products, and very real in many parts of our world. We will see it used around fraud.
Okay. You know, Anthony, if one looks at the current status, because I think that a lot of, you know, this whole sustainability aspect and the recycling aspect is kind of start in our backyard sort of thing, you know, and because packaging is not, I don't believe packaging is the problem. I think it's the solution, or part of the solution. How, in your mind, from that which you're very involved in terms of the recycling side of life, how do we change the mindsets of the various generations? You know, you look at your parents and your grandparents, that sort of age group, and your age group, and then your children, you know, because each have different mindsets. How do we change those mindsets around the aspect of recyclability? No, recycling, not recyclability. That's a technical aspect. Recycling.
I think there's a difference depending on where you live, Pierre, in terms of what is your context and what your peers do, because it's not just you and your family, it's a broader community issue. I think one of the problems across Southeast Asia, you say it's not a problem, but I think people would disagree with you that there is issues. And I understand what Alan was saying, that we can't just focus on recycling as as the only attribute of sustainability. I totally agree with that. But that doesn't mean there's not a problem. And so when it comes to, say, creeks and beaches and waterways that do have flexible plastics, I think we need to look at that and understand, well, what is the root cause of why it is? Now, people might say, well, there's no value on plastic, and therefore there's no reason to pick it up. Whereas a rigid plastic bottle, there maybe is value. So how do we look at that? How do we sort of bring in externalities that I was mentioning before onto the value of a product in the first place, such a bit like a deposit return scheme type thing? Well, what is that a crazy concept for flexible plastics? Maybe it is, but where else can we go to find to incentivize people to, you know, people talk about even Australia, for instance, though one of the critics was talking about a container deposit scheme, and primarily they were saying the main beneficiaries is the people who walk the streets and pick up litter off the parks and gardens so they can cash in their 10 cents. And people say, well, what's wrong with that? I mean, that person has just got some revenue, the park's being cleaned up. That sounds pretty good to a lot of people. So that's just an example in one context, but in another context, maybe the financials don't allow that to prosper because there's no value on the product. and therefore there's no, if you capture materials, is it any worth? So I don't necessarily have got the answer here, but I think that the questions need to be asked. How do we sort of get to the root cause of why there is leakage of flexible plastics? Because it has to be a problem we solve. It can't just be something that we say, we've got to focus on shelf life, or we've got to focus on this. Of course, they're important things. That's the purpose for the plastic. But in terms of engaging the consumers and the citizens of the world to pick these materials up and do the right thing with them, that is a massive challenge we all have to work on. I spoke about the start about building an army. How do we incentivize the army to come towards being part of the solution? Litter is a big part of that.
So, Joe, you know, we alluded to the fact that you are involved in education and training. So, what Alan and what Anthony has just said makes me think that there's a little bit of lack of education in some or other format. Do you agree? And if that's the case, if you do agree, how then from that educational training, whatever, can we help the comment that Anthony has put up there?
I think certainly education is a big issue. There's no doubt about it. Even in first world countries where people don't really understand the effects that they're having by throwing garbage on the street and so forth. I look at Africa as a great example, and Anthony alluded to the value. Is there real value in plastics material? And people in Africa, in South Africa, where you and I know very, very well, earn a living, and in some cases a substantial living, by actually doing just that every single day, by picking litter up off the street and turning that litter into cents and turning that litter into a meal for a daily basis. But getting back to an education point of view, I really think it's the industry, it's the packaging industry, it's people like us that really need to force the change. We need to actually be the sort of the if you want to call it, the founder members of trying to force that change. Because I think Alan said earlier on, if we sit back accepting the status quo, it's not going to change. Okay, we can't sit back and wait for government to make a change for us. We can't sit back and wait for this general public to force that change on us. I think the change is going to come from the packaging industry, the plastic industry, to educate the consumer. Now, how do we educate the consumer? That's going to be the biggest thing. It's not about educating the industry, because, you know, we look at us within the packaging industry. I think we have a bit of an idea of what happens with the plastic material, the reason why it's difficult to recycle, the reason why there's no value, as Anthony said, on the plastic material. And we understand the complex materials and how we're going to protect food and so on and so forth. But the consumer doesn't know. They don't understand the difference between a piece of plastic that they're going to get for the shopping bag coming from a supermarket chain to a packet that's going to contain snack food, as an example, or a packet that's going to contain noodles. They don't understand that it's two different types of plastics, and by destroying it and disposing of that plastic, what that's actually doing to the mainstream. So I think as an industry, we have a job, there's no doubt about it, and how we educate the consumer and how we educate industry has got to be through sort of different platforms, like through the World Packaging Organization, through, you know, different organizations like the Australian Institute of Packaging, or institutes of packagings around the world, but going through media, having champions, having people who are actually can stand up and say, these are the basics. And sometimes we need to consider about going back to basics to explain to the consumer the very, very difference between product A and product B in a basic format. Because they just want to know, this piece of plastic, do I put it in my bin that goes to landfill, or do I put it in my bin that's going to go into recycling? And sadly, here in Australia, we know there's still a lot of confusion. The consumer still thinks soft plastics will go through the recycling chain. And as we know at this moment in time, there's obviously a challenge. But as you are aware, we're working on some really good projects at the moment in terms of taking soft plastics through curbside recycling. But I think it's not up to me and from my company, or Alan for his company, to say, yes, we're going to try and educate. But as an industry together, we got to collectively put a force forward and say, guys, this is the issue that we're faced with. By you taking that piece of plastic and not disposing of it properly, we've got a duty and a job to do to try and help the consumer understand that. And I say from a basic, I keep talking about, every time I'm answering a question about basics, the basics are being missed, I think, in terms of packaging, and certainly in terms of flexible packaging. And we need to go back to basics to actually get that message across.
Yeah. You know, and then the flexible industry has been such an exciting industry for so many years. And we see more and more really value items coming through in that particular space. Again, based on your experience, what would you like to see as the next exciting aspect or element in the flexible industry, in a flexible plastics industry? And will really make you excited. I know you're excited already, but more excited.
You know, there's, I feel sorry for anyone that visits a supermarket with me because I'm pretty excited about packaging across the board. So most people are wary of that. Look, I like the idea of form, function, and delivery of value. And I do think that there is so much not thought about and not tapped. You know, I love the examples of fantastic pieces of packaging, which we, you know, the man in the street loves. You know, I think a common example is, do any of us still have our iPhone box at home? You know, it's an example of us. If you get the right piece of packaging, that the interesting thing about this is we value that piece of packaging. We think it's worth something, so we look after it. And to me, that's really where the heart of things are. And Anthony talked about this. Joe has talked about this. If there's one takeaway from this evening's discussion, I think that we really need somehow to build value into packaging and build that in consumers' minds, because Joe's company, Anthony's work, APCO's work, the prep tool, Sealed Air, one piece of this isn't solved by us. And that's if packaging has no value to people in the street, they'll continue to make poor decisions about where it goes at end of life. I take the time to do a cleanup, some kind of cleanup wherever I travel in the world. And the most recent one I did was in the back blocks of Argentina. And I'm always struck by what kinds of packaging I find when I'm doing that cleanup. And it also makes me think about where the heart of the problem is. And this is where Anthony was talking about something interesting here. You know, I know we're talking about flexibles today, and I'll get shut by the PET industry for saying this, but imagine a world where we had safe drinking water available to us everywhere. How would that change the look of materials out and about that we see in the world?
Yeah. Now, I want to bring that same sort of question to you, Anthony. What would make you feel better about flexibles? What must happen that'll make you lie in that pillow at night thinking, yeah, we're now on the right path to what I've been thinking about for so long? And I know you've been involved in this whole thing for the last, I think 2000, and if I remember exactly what you mentioned when you wrote to me.
A few years.
So probably the last, at least the 5-6 years.
Yeah. Look, I think that, as Ellen and Joe was saying, that they've got the capacity to make monopolymer materials across the whole spectrum. We're hearing about retort packs. We're hearing about all different types of things. And it may be also the case that if you're looking at a situation where we don't need 3 years shelf life, 3 months might be okay in a certain situation based on the supply chain. And so you can look at all those sort of decisions, and we get back to simplistic, as Joe was saying, simplistic packaging that has a better recovery rate. I think there's going to be a chance to put some value on it. I think it's in the past that there's been but I also think that it has to be driven by, I don't think it's just education. I think it's also an aspect of advocacy, collaboration, because you can't just sit there and educate people, because it's almost like it's your job. I'll educate you, but now it's your job. It has to be more than that. It might be changing policies. It might be encouraging sort of dialogue across different supply chains. It might be, I think about something like the Paris Climate Agreement. There was 185 countries come together to agree on something about climate change. Well, what about if we got the 20 biggest packaging firms to come together to have a global compact that they're all going to cut through and take out all the low-hanging fruit and get all that fixed up and actually drive forward together? Of course, there's going to be competition. I'm not being idealistic about this. I'm just saying that sometimes you've got to provide a forum where people can come together and achieve these outcomes that we need for flexible plastics, why don't we just aim for 2023? Why does it have to be 2025? Let's bring it forward. Let's accelerate the change.
I like that answer. There were a couple of things there that really resonated well with me. Certainly, it's not only education. Education is an important part, but there were many other parts there as well, collaboration and so on. And you know what I like the most about that answer, Anthony? I could feel the passion. That was the best, and that's so important. You know,
I have a problem with that. I can't hold myself back. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's perfect, and that's why I'm glad that you guys came on this forum. Now, we're sort of coming up to the hour mark, but Joe, I want to end up with you, and say, when your working life comes to retirement, and you look back on however many years you're in the industry, what would you like us to remember Joe Foster for?
That's a really good question. How much time have we got left to answer that?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. No, I think me personally, I want to institute change. And I think one of the biggest changes that we want to put in place is really to educate the consumer, educate the industry about the value of packaging. People don't really see the true value of packaging. And I think people only see packaging as a container, a piece of plastic that ends up in the bin. They don't understand the functionality of the packaging. There's more to the packaging than just containing the product. It can add value in terms of functionality, it can add value in terms of protection, shelf life, and even add value in terms of active packaging or smart type of packaging. So what I want people to remember me is that I want people to understand the close association with packaging and what it can actually do for that particular product, and not just see it as a useless piece of plastic. There's more to it than just a piece of plastic. And that's my job. That's what I want to be remembered for.
Thank you. Well, gentlemen, you know, that's one of the fastest hours that I've been involved in. And I really want to thank you all for the way you answered, the way you got involved, and the way you brought your answers to the listeners. Bearing in mind that we've got listeners in this forum, but we also have listeners live stream. They're on live stream, and we can't see them or know if they wanted to ask any questions. But Joe Foster and Anthony Payton and Alan Adams, I know it's coming up to quite late in your part of the world, and we've kept you out of that bed. So thank you all three so much for joining us today. I wish you all well and have a good night.
Thanks, Pierre.
Thanks, Pierre. Thanks for the challenging questions. You put it on us. I think they're excellent lines of questioning. Well done.
Thank you.
For the opportunity. Brilliant.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye to all the listeners as well. And thank you for joining us from around the world. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.